Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton,
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
and we are the FAIRtax Guys.
I think I'm going to hang this one like an upright bass
An upright bass, you're going to sit there and play
and
it like,
play it like a fiddle. Well,
well, my brother Andy can play one of those things. It's amazing.
yeah, he's an accomplished musician. Always enjoy some of the postings that he puts on social media. And
Oh yeah, he's one of a kind. So maybe we'll get. I've actually talked to him about the FAIRtax, and he likes it.
that's good.
He's not quite the super advocate for it that you and I are. But I mean, if you explain the fair tax, like last week, we had the ChatGPT, the computer that was examining just the merits of the facts of the fair tax. And if you
Right.
didn't catch that show, go to our Rumble archive or our YouTube channel and see what ChatGPT had to say about the fair tax, which was as honest and emotionless an analysis as you can get because it came from a machine. But it was rather interesting to see what the artificial intelligence program said about the fair tax. So go back and check that out if you didn't see it last week. All right.
We had a great week last week, so please check that show out. And coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about some of the misinformation that's out there about the fair tax. And believe me, there's a lot of it.
Oh yeah, that was the one thing that struck me about what the computer said about the fair tax was it did not include any of these, really wild, totally made up, no fact basis at all arguments that people raise against the fair tax. We're going to look at some of those in a few minutes, but right now, before I get hit by these trains behind me, I am going to let's see what the Congress critters are up to this week with trying to change the tax code. Again, you go to congress.gov, you put the words Internal Revenue Code in quotes in the search bar at the top. On the left side, be sure you're checked only legislation in the 118th Congress. And if you do that, as of the day we're recording this, 1,450 hits on that search. Of course, not all of those are proposals to change the tax code, but most of them are. And most of the ones that are proposals to change the tax code are being done at the behest of a lobbyist who is trying to buy special tax treatment for their clients. And so the tax code is just chock full of stuff where people don't get treated the same way. This group gets a favor, the other one doesn't. We talk about that a lot here on FAIRtax Power Radio. Let's see, my wife just opened the door. My lighting probably went crazy here. Let me pin that over and fix that. Okay. But let's dig in here. HR 7425 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide a deduction for certain newborn expenses. Now, I don't know if that's expenses for certain newborns or certain expenses that apply to all newborns. English can be a funny language sometimes, can't it?
It can. And sometimes the people writing it are just they really need to go back to school.
Oh yeah, so this is David Schweikert from Arizona to provide a deduction for certain newborn expenses. Okay, we'll just kind of let that sit for where it is. Got another one here, HR 7418 to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to exclude from gross income certain compensation to clinical trial participants. I guess if there's a pharmaceutical company that wants to try out a new medicine on folks and they have a clinical trial and they pay people to participate in it, that exclude from gross income certain compensation to clinical trial participants. That's Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania.
Certain. They're always like, here, we're going to take this segment and we're going to give them a benefit as opposed to everybody.
Yep, that's what the tax code does. And the fair tax doesn't do that. The fair tax treats everyone the same. If you make a retail purchase of a new product or you buy a retail service like you get your lawn done, you pay the fair tax. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you are or how much money you've got or how little money you've got. You pay the fair tax on every purchase. But then again, that fair tax is reimbursed to you on your spending up to, for your basic necessities. We're going to get into that a little bit later on this program. This is an interesting one. This is HR 7319 from Representative Claudia Tenney of New York. It's called the End Zuckerbuck Act of 2024. Now, I assume you know what a Zuckerbuck is.
It was a name given to money that was provided for certain activities around an election cycle by Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, which owns Facebook and all the others.
That's basically the guy that owns Facebook, and he put a lot of money into the last election cycle trying to tip it one way. But HR 7319 says to amend the Internal Revenue Code to prohibit 501c3 organizations from providing direct funding to official election organizations, and to amend the Help America Vote Act to prohibit the District of Columbia from receiving or using funds or certain donations from private entities for the administration of a District of Columbia election, and your favorite phrase, for other purposes. So they're trying, and I guess that's a good thing, to try to lessen the impact of these super zillionaires who come in and spend a lot of money trying to influence the election in a particular way. But it's
argued that it could be argued, though, that funding to a particular level is a component of our First Amendment free speech rights. So those rocky kind of places we find ourselves when we have these discussions about how elections are funded and how much should be in and who, and it's a tough one.
Yeah, this is not our issue. The fair tax is our issue, but it'd be nice if we could find a way to make it so it is not just so prohibitively expensive to run for office, and you need to raise millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to even run for office. But let's not go down there. That's not our issue. Let us continue here with our Congress.gov. Here's one from the Senate, S 3798. A bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to require taxpayers claiming the child and their income tax credits and their qualifying children, requiring them to have a valid Social Security number for employment purposes. That's cool.
Yeah.
Cindy Hyde-Smith from Mississippi is the one behind that one. And I saved the best for last one. I got a feeling that this one is going to find its way into the 2024 Tax Proposal Hall of Shame, because it is just, you look at that and say, really? You're going to put that in the tax code? I refer to S 3795, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide that the 50% limitation on the deduction for meal expenses does not apply to meals provided on certain fishing boats or at certain fish processing facilities. You talk about a really narrowly focused benefit for a very small group of people. Let's see if you can guess where that came from. Which state has a rather robust fishing industry?
Florida?
Nope. Other side of the country.
California.
Farther north.
Washington.
Even farther north.
Canada. Alaska.
Alaska. That's from Senator Lisa Murkowski. It has one co-sponsor, the other senator from Alaska.
Nobody else, what we're going to do?
That's go
sandwich on the boat. What's the deal?
Oh, that's going into the Hall of Shame, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide. Apparently, there's a 50% limitation on the deduction of meal expenses. You can only deduct half of what you eat. But Senator Murkowski says, let's not apply that limitation to meals that are provided on certain, check that, Alaskan fishing boats or at certain fish processing. That reaches the Hall of Fame just on the sheer ridiculousness level of what the Congress critters are putting into the tax code. That's crazy.
It's going to be fast tracked to the heap at the end of the year, where we ridicule even further the tax code with some
Yeah,
of the work of the year, and we're
when we
only in.
get when we get to the end of the year and we review the 2024 tax proposal Hall of Shame on the last Fairtax Power Radio episode of the calendar year, well, remind me to check and see if that bill passed or not.
I
And
will.
we'll see how that goes. But okay, that's going to do it for Congress.gov. It's just incredible what the Congress critters put into the tax and to get away with it. Because I think you and I are probably the only people in the entire country that are looking at this every week and seeing what they're doing.
Oh yeah, nobody else is, and I don't even know that they are. They probably have a member of their staff writing all of that up after they've figured out this is what we need to be focusing on for our constituents to
Yeah,
make it.
no, this is what we need to be focusing on to get the lobbyist cash will help us get reelected.
Yes, that's
And
right.
this, that, and the other. Okay, let's move on. Remember last week that we were talking about the how the ChatGPT, the artificial intelligence program, did not come up with any of the stuff that we hear all the time from people who have a vested interest in keeping the income tax system in place. And we're going to go through some of the biggest lies that are raised about the fair tax. Let me toss you the first one. And you see, you got a bunch of resources called up there on your computer, but you will not be talking about the fair tax for long before somebody says, "Oh, it's a sales tax. It's regressive. It'll hurt the poor." So there's a big, high, fat, hanging curveball for you to knock out of the park.
Well, there's several cons to the fair tax system that kind of get raised into the conversations.
But it's
Um,
all vaporware. None of them are real.
yeah. Well, here's one. Middle income families may see higher taxes. Prebates may keep taxes low for people with low incomes. Those with middle incomes may see higher tax rates overall. This is especially true for families paying for childcare and other large expenses out of pocket. But there,
ChatGPT didn't find that, did it?
no, no. And I'm wondering how GPT decided what to include and what not to. Again, how do you ask a question? But the challenges of the fair tax, when you go in there and you look, it's not a sales tax. It gets taxed. Your fair tax gets paid when you at the point of purchase, but you're eliminating the income tax, which is offsetting the fair tax, the consumption tax, when you go to buy something. So the prebate that comes at the beginning of every month for everybody based on the poverty level, which is calculated at the beginning of every year.
If you're a legal resident.
If you're a legal resident, you end up with four people in your family, you and the kids and your wife. There's a rate there. There's a rate calculation for that. If it's just people, there's a rate calculation there. If it's six people in your family, if you're the head of a household and it's just you and your wife, or maybe you're taking care of somebody, the challenge is getting the people that have the information out there about it being a sales tax. It is not something that will hold water over time.
Yeah, a lot of those articles that if they mention the prebate at all, they just
Well,
kind of pass it off as probably not going to be very effective, but they don't really look at it. The prebate reimburses to every legal household, not just the low income ones, but every legal household. The prebate will reimburse you every dime of fair tax you pay on your spending up to the poverty level, which of course varies with your household size. But you're going to get your refund back on your spending up to that level. Now, the fair tax doesn't care what you spend that money on. Now,
right.
the
Essentially.
rational thinking here is that when people have a limited amount of money to spend, they're going to provide their basic necessities first. They're going to buy food, they're going to buy clothing, they're going to arrange for their basic transportation. They'll pay their rent, or they'll pay their mortgage, they'll pay the utility bill. They're going to pay their basic necessities before they, book a cruise to Hawaii or something like that. And so whatever you spend, your first, $40,000 or around $40,000 for a family of four, doesn't matter what you spend it on, you're going to get back the taxes you pay on that level of spending. So you do not take a dime out of your own pocket until you have provided for your own basic necessities. And people will still look at you and say, the fair tax hurts the poor. No, they don't pay any taxes out of their pocket until their spending exceeds the poverty level, and they bring home their entire paycheck. Everyone, again, not just low income people, everyone brings home their entire paycheck with no withholding, no federal payroll taxes. So, especially low income people that are having a hard time making ends meet are going to have a lot more money in their pocket. They'll bring home their whole paycheck, and the prebate will cover most, if not all, of the taxes they pay. And
Yeah,
there's not another tax proposal system in the works that even comes close to being that good a deal for low income people.
exactly. I got one for you.
All right, go
Uh,
for it.
there will be a potential dampening effect on overall economic growth. With
Ah,
prices, many individuals may choose to insource their consumption rather than spending on haircuts, meals out, childcare, fixing cars. This could lead to a slowdown in the GDP.
well, I got to tell you, there is a Nobel Prize winning economist, was one of, I think, close to 100 economists. I'm reminded of what Professor David Kendall did. He wrote a letter back when President Bush was having this presidential committee on taxation, and a bunch of professional economists, including a Nobel Prize winner, wrote to that commission and said, you guys need to look at the fair tax. It is going to be rocket fuel for the economy. Now that's not somebody's that those just anybody's opinion. Those are professional economists, and Professor Kendall also said that there were a number of other professional economists that agreed with the sentiment of that letter. They didn't sign on to it simply because they thought that the fair tax was a political impossibility, and that they said I'm not going to waste my time with something that's not going to happen. But
But
we've
that's
dealt with that. You need to go back and watch our women's suffrage to see how impossible things actually happen. But anybody who claims that the fair tax is going to dampen the economy is just nuts. Has absolutely no clue what they're talking about. The projections, if you can go look at the research at fairtax.org, you will see that there have been studies done. I think the Brookings Institution did one that said that the fair tax would about triple or quadruple the GDP growth with the fair tax versus what you get under the income tax. With the income tax, 4% GDP is really good. But this study said that the fair tax would ignite double digit GDP growth. So the fair tax is going to be rocket fuel, not a wet blanket for the economy.
And we always hear about the evasion of taxes with the current income tax system. One
Mm-hmm.
of one of the things that you hear out there, one of the arguments within the conversations about the fair tax, with regard to making it easier or less complicated to cheat, the incentives in some people's conversations within the fair tax conversations that the fair tax would raise incentives for private businesses to cheat. Businesses who want to undercut the competition may decide to cut out sales tax collection. This
And
issue,
they will get caught in a heartbeat if they do that.
and it goes on, the argument goes on to say that this issue could be especially rampant when businesses deal with cash or checks rather than electronic payments. But if the cash goes into the business's deposit, then there is the dollar that would
Yeah,
be taxed.
it goes on the books regardless of whether it's a cash or credit transaction.
Right.
goes on the books, and that's very easily audited. Our time's slipping away from us here. Let me toss up the other really big one, big fat lie that people tell about the fair tax. Oh, it's going to make your life 30% more expensive. It's going to add 30% to the cost of everything you buy. Your groceries are going to cost you 30% more. Your clothes are going to cost you 30% more. Your gas is going to cost you 30% more. You want to swat at that one?
Well, it's the difference between two words, exclusive or inclusive. Uh, when when you talk about how the fair tax has progressed, and when when the former speaker Kevin McCarthy was brought in to be the Speaker of the House, he had a heck of a time making that hurdle where he got everybody's approval. One of the things that came about was the fair tax had to come to the floor off of the House Ways and Means Committee table and onto the floor for a vote. Well, we know that
Mm-hmm.
hasn't happened, but what did happen was the fair tax got a lot of light shown on it in the early part of the current Congress that we're in. Being the
Mm-hmm.
fact that its first introduction into Congress was in 1999, it's gone back and forth on the number of people that have supported it. But one of the things that people look at is 30%, and we say 23 is
Yeah.
exclusive. And
Well, they'll tell you that it's going to make the fair tax is going to make your life so expensive you can't afford to live. Refer folks back to the FTPR episode of a couple of weeks ago when we were talking to Steve Hayes. The fair
right,
tax the fair tax will knock out, again, we mentioned all of the corporate taxes that are levied against businesses, the compliance costs. Think of all of the companies that have a hand in getting a loaf of bread to the store shelf. The farmer, the grain elevator, the bakeries, and all that stuff, and even the companies that dig the iron ore out of the earth to make the steel, to make the farm equipment that raises the wheat. There is a ton of the truckers that bring it to you, the retailer that sells it to you. There are a ton of different entities that have a hand in getting a loaf of bread to your table. And every one of those currently adds tax costs to the price of their product or service, which you, the consumer, ultimately pay. The fair tax knocks all of that out.
that's right.
Retail prices, the wholesale prices especially, are going to drop dramatically because the fair tax reduces the cost of doing business by a significant amount. And then when the fair tax replaces those embedded costs that are currently there that you don't see, retail prices are not going to soar anywhere near 23 or 30%. They may go up a little, but there's not full agreement on this. I've heard some people say, well, under the fair tax, retail prices may rise a little bit. There are others that claim that the fair tax is going to drive retail prices down from their current levels. And I imagine that the truth in there is somewhere, it may raise things for some and lower things for others. It will depend on the actual product or service involved. But the idea that the fair tax is going to raise the price of everything you buy by either 23 or 30% doesn't matter. That is just poppycock. That's the nicest word I can think of to use there.
That's right. That's right. And the other one of the other things that folks argue about is, as we talked a minute ago, hurt the poor, but also that it's going to hurt seniors who've already paid taxes on some of the money. At
Yes,
the
that you're paying taxes twice. Gee, you paid taxes when you made it, and now you're going to tax it again when I spend it. Again, I point you to the hidden embedded taxes in the prices of everything you buy. Yeah. So if you are paying taxes twice with the income tax system, once when your income is taxed, and then once again when somebody else's taxes are passed on to you in the prices of the things you buy. And so you're paying those taxes one way or the other. With the fair tax, you see it. With the income tax, you don't. So that is another just totally crazy argument. One more real quick one. We got about 3.5 minutes left. Oh, the fair tax is going to cause these huge black markets to spring up.
How?
You've heard that one. Well, in order for a black market to exist, the prices on the black market have to be considerably less than the prices that you can get the same item for through a legitimate outlet.
Right.
If somebody's gonna sell you a car on the street corner, they'll sell you a car for $50, and it'll cost you $5,000. That same used car will cost you $5,000 at a dealer. That would be tempting. But the fair tax, again, as we mentioned, is not going to raise retail prices significantly at all. There are some studies that indicate retail prices will actually go down under the fair tax. So there's no incentive to buy from a black market when the fair tax is not going to have a major impact on current retail prices, and people will just continue buying what they're buying from the places that they're buying it from.
Right, and the other side of that too is imports from other countries that come in will not have the benefit. They'll have a rate that would be, say, $1,000, and the same type, even in a vehicle, with a car that you would get an import from overseas. Now we know that a lot of American-made vehicles, or parts are made elsewhere, sometimes put together in the States, but those costs will be eliminated from taxation that are made in the United States. So we actually are supercharging the economy in that way, in terms of the manufacturing of parts for a vehicle. In this example, we end up $1,000. We might end up being able to sell it for $800 and already be competitive with imports on where items made in the United States would be that much better, cost that much less.
All right. So to summarize here quick, the fair tax will not hurt the poor. It will be a boon to the poor when they get their prebate and they bring home their entire paycheck and they don't pay taxes on their spending at the poverty level. It will not create a huge black market. It will not increase the price of everything you buy by 23%. All of this stuff is just, pulled out of thin air. And the fact that ChatGPT did not mention any of that stuff means that it's just it's made out of water vapor, I guess. And I'm afraid that's going to wrap up this edition of FairTax Power Radio. Again, thank you so much for watching, listening, and sharing the videos. Appreciate you being here. And until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are the FairTax Guys, providing you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So what would you do for her?
We've got several programs that will help her. We just need to find out how much she makes. But the good news is, the less she does, the more we can help.
Yeah.
If I may, with the fair tax, we wouldn't even tax her income. So the more she makes, the more she has.
But still, a consumption tax could eat up a lot of her income.
Which is why at the beginning of every month, we're actually going to give back all that she pays in taxes on basic necessities.
You're going to give her back her taxes?
Every month. On everything taxed on basic necessities. But we're also going to give it back to you and to every American citizen.
Why?
Well,